Inside the Soul of Islam, a unique view into the love, beauty, and wisdom of Islam for spiritual seekers of all faiths, by Mamoon Yusaf, is more than just a focus on the inside out paradigm which he teaches from. It's more than just the idea that Islam shares some of the good and truth of other faiths. In an age where animosity seems to be growing for Islam, we find that in English, the best-selling poet is Rumi, if we consider, there being different translators. Some who aren't Muslim have spoken out, even in a way that makes it seem like they don't really know about the religion, but they've pointed out that, what about the majority that's not doing those things that you like to put on the news? Religious behavior and beliefs can be attached to real world knowledge. Unlike the early Orientalist, which didn't know context or full translations of the verses that they heard of for the teachings and practices that they heard of, there is a massive body of literature about where these things come from. There is a mentality to look at what Islam does to psychology, or might it be better to say with psychology, because there's different psychological types and different material culture situations, and isn't Islam supposed to be for everyone? Well, they choose to accept it, of course. Might it be, rather than Islam being obsolete, that ideas that people have that turn them against Islam are obsolete? Muhammad would use the example of those around him didn't know to teach the faith. The three main stages that people will tend to refer to are Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. Ihsan is a perfecting goodness. Iman is a faith. Islam is that you've made the outer manifestation of being upon the path. It's not for teachers or others to bully or torture people into learning religion better than they're currently learning, or pronouncing perfectly or something like that. Sure, these are disciplines to bring about, but that's not how. I've talked much about, the meaning of things. Now, some of those meanings may differ per people, but the idea that people just go through the prayers, they leave out mention of techniques, They leave out historical mentions in regards to the meanings of the ritualistic practices. That takes some from some people. That keeps some people from doing the obligatory forms of worship. Keeps even more people from doing extra because it's like the meaning is gone. Because that's what myth is. Myth is not something that's not true. It's not a fable. There are myths that are fables, but religion itself doesn't encourage untruthfulness. But they have meaning. They have purpose. We need to know that. People should probably ask themselves, why are you on the path you are on? What is the path you are on? Sometimes, after time, experiences will come in to actually encounter a place of pilgrimage that one has known about, that one has seen pictures of, and to actually be there and be doing it is, are two different things. We should be real that atheism is every bit as much a belief system as any form of theism. Islam's not just there for people way back when to form a tradition about their interpretations and then everybody after them has to follow it. And we should try, when we're learning from somebody, to learn from somebody who, not only do they not just say, well, this is what you're supposed to believe, this is what we've been told we're supposed to believe, but that they have an ethic that gives them a way to express answers to the difficult or even offensively put questions. In a sense, it doesn't matter where we were or, what our response is to any particular so-called Islamic terrorism, like there could possibly be such a thing, with Islam forbidding extremism and forbidding attacks on civilian targets, and one could go on and see if they can't link this stuff to Islam. Why in the world do we have to explain it every time, right? Works of altruism are jobs that have a good effect on the world, can be seen in light of the focus on saving a life or ending slavery for an individual or whatever. So there is no dichotomy of, are you going to get into religion? Are you going to get into, some other work? Now, you don't have to get into religion as some sort of job, like you're a religious scholar for work, or you get paid to lead prayers or something like that. That's not it either. Self-help books and other things they could be trying to sell us, we can put it in our own context, right? As much as possible, it's important to understand Islam from the Arabic. The other is commentary, you could say, but to have some knowledge of what you're reading beyond that particular translation is important. You should regard your own limits and how much you take on. Doing what's right or being on what's right isn't necessarily going to fix whatever you've decided it's going to fix. Sometimes we need to learn that the issues come from incompatibilities that were beyond our control sometimes. Some things are our reactions to them rather than, anything that we should feel guilty or ashamed for. To become enlightened, we need to put things together. There needs to be universals. There needs to be consistency. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, they will vary. So, what are we upon outside of that? Yes, our contexts might be entirely physical, or might be mental in part, some of them entirely psychiatric. But there is an underlying spiritual reality. There is a spiritualizing force within us where all experiences can be in that. Sure, when I ask people, have you had a spiritual experience? I mean dreams, encounters of the spiritual world as spiritual. But those with a mystical outlook or sense can connect a lot more than those, peak experiences, as one might call them. When it comes to even the revelation and the inspiration of Islam, there are misunderstandings that arise from even other than ignoring the context within it, the historical surrounding of it, and, personal misassociations with the words. Well, that's where a lot of it lies, right? Because we have this idea of Sharia that's not the same thing as Islamic law. And Sharia is, as Islamic law, well, it is what's actually Islamic for you, not necessarily somebody else's interpretation of it. We can go directly to the sources. There's nothing in Islam that says we can't follow the Prophet. Of course, we should try to have some sort of holistic idea of that sort of thing. Jihad is another one of those terms. That jihad is not, holy war. That's not what it means in Arabic. It's a struggle. It's a striving. It's, and the greatest one, of course, is the lifelong, the personal struggle, rather than that where you're outwardly trying to change other people. I mean, they can be both important, but it's not something of forcing religion. The Gaza Wat people think, oh, they fought disbelievers. Yeah, but they didn't fight them because they were disbelievers. Two other terms that are very, very misunderstood are hadith and sunnah. Whose event? Whose saying? Whose tradition? Can we turn to one of these verses in Al-Quran, or one of the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, and put our questions through that? We are not perfect, but we see this miraculous composition of Al-Quran, like one verse to the other, like we, different times and different places even, and yet the order, matches perfectly. You look at it from its letters, you look at it from its meaning and sound, the number values, whatever, you can find that sort of stuff. You don't find a perfecting of Al-Quran like you do with other texts. You find that the quality and the meaning was consistent. It didn't come through like that of at any philosopher you're looking at. There are some key concepts, right? That might set things apart. There's monotheism in turning to a deity that is not limited by any of these creation things, but at the same time better than any of the creation in anything worthwhile, or any good quality. I would say there's certain limiting good things that humans might partake in. A Muslim will believe in all the prophets to all of humanity, not necessarily what has been said about them through the ages, but that their message came through aright. An afterlife that is more than just karma, more than just cause and effect, that God is merciful beyond that, and there's no need of any intercessors. There is real right and wrong, and this right and wrong is for all genders, all races, all tribes, all nationalities, everyone in any position. There's an answer for them, and it didn't take modern thought or whatever to do that. Modern thought, except for quotes, can definitely be used to support in various ways. Hijab and not touching the women that are, outside one's circle, that, you're either married to them or, they're the people that you can never marry, or, that those sorts of rules. It privatizes and enhances the idea of women's consent. There's a lot more to that, but it doesn't hold them back. It holds them up by not over objectifying them. Sure, there's a person here or there that feels like their life is better, but honestly, it takes a lot less effort for women to be fully modest and not go around with makeup and all that all the time, and their health's better for it than, the alternative. And honestly, it's not an advancement of society. These things have been done again and again and again. Now we think we know what's toxic and what's not, and we really don't. We find out we replace something with something, and then we find out that that's toxic or not good for you either. But one thing they don't tend to bring up is the idea that, because of the difference is in the gender, the females get their full rights as adults 2 years earlier, because we're talking about biological age. We're not talking about physical age. And if you keep that stuff the same, you're really not valuing women in their difference to say that, Islam has always allowed women their say, has always allowed them, their property. They were always allowed to not only influence their husbands to do stuff in society, but they would play a role in society themselves as well. And through a lot more than just Prophet Muhammad's wives, we see lessons that, even when it comes to hadith of the Prophet, might not have been passed on otherwise. The living interpretation of spiritual wisdom, much more the case. And of course, to define Sharia is a term of, it's a way, it's a path It's the preferred path. It's the middle path. It's the path by the waters. So people use that for whatever their preferred path is. If they speak a Sanskrit or Arabic-based language, some of us will learn better when we have a bilingual Quran that we listen to. And some of us will learn better or read with going back and forth. Some of us will learn better than that when we have some relevant context. You know, maybe we need some words defined a little bit more. Maybe we need some quote from some scholar or mystic in relation to what we're reading. Maybe we need, the various historical context of how it was used through the ages. Maybe we just need to go back to what is said about the prophetic context. As long as we're not being made to not do what we're supposed to do, or to do what we're not supposed to do, there's no issue in following the law of the land. In Surah 4 of Al-Quran, there's emphasis on following the revelation and the inspiration. And, without that emphasis, those in authority over you. But it's not the Pauline Christianity way of you must believe and obey whoever's in charge no matter what. No. Not of the family, not the government. The idea that we can't derive laws for ourselves straight from the sources is not found in any saying of Muhammad. It's not found in the Quran. This is something that others have put upon us. And that's where I differ with this guy, because he himself doesn't quote any reason from Muhammad why somebody can't follow the Quran directly, because it does speak to you, and it doesn't take, it speaks to Islam is supposed to speak to the individual. Certain personal things, well, that could be for their personal life. There's some universal things that, we can't understand. It's like, how far are we going to take that? Are we going to say, well, don't approach sex outside of marriage, and don't murder people, and avoid the outward appearance of evil, stuff like this. That's clear. It's not the differing meaning verses. It's verses that everybody knows the base meaning. So we're not supposed to follow that until we find that our sheikh has told us that that's what we're supposed to do. The cultural imperialism that has taken on different forms, that's not what Islam does. Islam allows minority communities. The contradictions are within ourselves. That's one thing that Islam stands apart in, is it addresses every issue, but it doesn't have contradictions. And as far as insight, there's always, Muhammad encouraged finding new use of the verses. You connect it to what else the Quran has to say, what else he had to say. He even talked to, people even asked him, I'm speaking elsewhere, people even asked him, what about those who ritually draw circles? It's like, well, are you doing it in accordance with what the prophets did or not, right? That's not the exact story, but that's what came through. And he let people write poetry, so obviously you can, say your own supplications, if you want to call it that, and other stuff. So Arabic has 14 words for love that are common. The Quran has 36 of them. If we're going to play games and translate quite the way that some modern Bible translators have, the Quran is still going to outdo what the Bible has with its 11 verses that are as a base of love by and for God. The Quran is a bit more explicit with 56 verses. And then you have those two community verses, don't you? But, you know, wad and yuhib, you know, there's more to it than those verses. I mean, religion is a relationship. Forget the regulation talk for a second and realize religion is a relationship. And so we start upon mercy and care and all that sort of stuff. And then the love as a verb is the focus in the Quran. As a noun, it does better than any faith I can think of. But as a verb, it really outshines, both in concentration and in the variety of its teaching. Now, there are faiths that do mention it more, but it's like they just blather on about divine love without... It's just a phrase they throw into things, is what I mean. Some of those low content speakers, you know? We're supposed to realize our potential. We're supposed to start on the teachings that we can implement. And it's said that half of religion is marriage. You know, family life is where it all branches out from. Or it can. There's different ways of thinking about things, right? When it isn't important, when it's just about your own personal tastes, don't be the sort of person who's going to bring about conflict. Let's focus on what our potential is and bringing that out. The Quran is said to be the most read and the most memorized book in the world. I mean, other than people being able to say, I think even more people could say the first chapter of the Quran than could say that the opening words in the Bible are in the beginning. Brashit, or whatever language they put that in. We got to be careful and realize that some of these so-called experts on religion, either they are and they're going to throw things in, or they're not. And, you know, even mainstream news companies will hire people that they know are shifty like that, you know, like a Robert Spencer or somebody. Certainly the Christian channels will throw that out every so often. There's even this guy who calls himself an imam, like, that's supposedly exposing things. It's like, I don't know who made you a prayer leader, but, you know, the masjids aren't, sure, people can visit and find out about the faith, but they're not for people who are going to be like that. No. The Quran is full of references of different sorts that leave the issue compact, that look at details, that leave it big, but not, not in a way it's like, well, you could have said that in 2 sentences, right? Every verse has meaning, every difference. The Arabic word of poetry, that doesn't apply to the Quran because there isn't anything that's in its sound that is not something that we can, find meaning in. The Quran, as much as it can rhyme and stuff, it doesn't appear to be styled for just for effect. It's a text that focuses on the methods and types of learning that you can connect to it from elsewhere. It wasn't written in a timed way where the focus was on naming Muhammad all over the place, or the people and events that he specifically encountered in a way that leaves these lessons as only referring to that. You know God as you end up knowing yourself and knowing the outer world if you go at it with that approach. 3 of the rights of Al-Quran are to understand, to memorize, and to practice. I don't remember at the moment if this book goes into the others of preaching, experiencing, but it certainly goes into believing. Islam is without an ordained priesthood. So one of the things when you're asking for help for interpretation, make sure it's about connecting to the sources of those interpretations rather than it being about their personal way. And as you spread religion, spread that root word with it too, the peace, the wholeness. The aleph in front makes it an expression of that. Islam is the surrender, the giving up to resisting the divine order of the universe, the submitting to carry out the commands or to avoid what you're supposed to avoid. We're supposed to distinguish truth from falsehood. We're supposed to distinguish enlightenment from ignorance. We're supposed to make things safer overall on, various levels. Now, sometimes there is a material price to pay for doing what is right. But in an overall sense, particularly if more and more people get involved in it, that's not so much the thing anymore, right? We need to drop this nonsense of phrases that people use to turn people against Islam. If Islam is against it, terrorism or murder or whatever, then there's no Islamic whatever. And, there isn't this idea in Islam of a pre-Islamic era. It doesn't matter who does what in the name of what. Is it part of what? It's not what's popular or what's merely your own taste. Is it right? Then, that's what you should be upon. It doesn't matter who's doing it or who's not doing it. We're not here to hate beings. We're not here to be trampled upon either. If people say something, or do something, if it's wrong and someone's being wrong, that's when we can talk against it. We don't mention evil for the purpose of entertainment. This isn't some talk show, or this isn't the news for the news. Because do they address the evil? Certain things grow more and more and more because this even the way the news talks about it. Practice as if you know, as if you're experiencing being in the presence of God. At all times, figure out what it means to be a real Muslim if you're going to claim that something is Islamic. How would a Muslim actually act in that situation rather than, everybody's flawed? No, this is not what we're... Internalize those good qualities that you can't externalize or you can't influence externally. Focus your attention on what is and what isn't. It's not that we're trying to do some repressive thing like blank our minds. No, we're trying to leave out of our minds what doesn't serve us. And I mean, what ultimately doesn't serve us, not, when everyone's trying to please me or something like that. When you pray, when you go over the religious material, that is when you need to be in the moment, for the moment. Work on understanding the remembrance that you're making, the why, how to experience it better, how to do more, perhaps in circumstances that you currently don't have, because, of course, as one may have gleaned by now, Islam, everything in life can be part of Islam if one wants it to be. Thought, word, and deed are all different forms which can be merged together as one. Sometimes you have to leave your current situation to get something done, whether it's occasionally or totally. Express the difficult truths. Figure out how not to be deceived. Take off the illusion and delusion of society. Don't focus on speaking ill of people. True or not, don't make that the focus. Encourage people and go beyond being entertaining or being entertained. Resist the mundane, resist the wrongful with a sense of gratitude to the ultimate. Have a response to the positive and negative tragedies before they come, or have some sort of preparation before they come. Not that you focus on the horrible things that could happen to you, but prepare for that. Prepare for death, because we're all going to die, and it's not morbid. It's often a very freeing thing. Learn to be at peace with what's beyond your control. Every thought matters, so be prepared for the change that could occur, or be careful of the change that could occur. Strive to maintain yourself, basically. Don't just act on a feel-good platform. Act on a not conflicting with one's own beliefs platform. Do something small and consistent. Let your actions become how you're known, without showing off, of course. How do we work on our intentions? What is the condition of our source drive? Detail out your gratitude. Figure out stuff day by day. Figure out stuff as the day goes along. Start approaching, anything about rules and skills and stuff like this. Start it upon the idea of a relationship. If we're thankful for what we have, it can open us up to more. Love what we have. Or focus on loving the good that we have or are about to have. get past the idea that some things aren't easy, that some terms aren't comfortable, and find the value in that. Some things that would be considered outside of religion, bring it into religion within your life. There are legitimate reasons to fight, but it's not just there's a cause and we go off and fight. And there's so many ethics that pretty much every war on both sides that people will mention will not be included in the Islamic idea of the combative jihad. And we're doing it for the other religious communities too when we do that. We are doing it for the other ethnic and heretic minorities. We're protecting their places of worship, their places of culture too when we do go to battle. I mean, self-defense is plenty of a reason, but try to rationalize your belief in God on much the same principles that people call themselves atheists. We can rationalize our belief in God. You don't be the sort of person that it would set that someone goes to hell. Like this idea that Muslims are killing other Muslims, this just doesn't make sense logically. How can they be the type of person that the Quran would say would go to hell? How can they be the person who is a denier in major ways? Now, major sins don't necessarily cancel out one's belief, but they can definitely tip the scales in stuff that you have to deal with in the afterlife, right? We use our ego and other aspects of our psychology, but we don't make that in charge for being in charge because as we know, we're flawed. And we don't make that about merely just serving it to serve it. Because of course, even the mind is a vehicle for ourselves as soul. Our attachments shouldn't be with the world for the world, or for our psychology. And we should work on our material modes and our psychiatric modes too. Anger, of course, is one of those ones to be careful for too. We work on being better, but do we really know who's better than who, or who will be better than who in the end? So let's just drop that focus of I'm better than you, so it's like, yeah, people get degrees and you get your positions with work and stuff like this, but even there you got to be, there's this somebody of a lower position might have some insight to the thing that's worth not only listening to, but deciding over one's own thing. And we should work on forgiving ourselves and others. We certainly should practice asking for forgiveness and then maybe think of excusing others sometimes. Heal from the claims against Islam or the events that are supposed to be proof against Islam by finding out how Islam is not supportive, how Islam would offer a different alternative. Finally, let's work on becoming non-abrogated. Mold one's emotional state, one's desires, one's thought states towards what's best for one's spirit in the ultimate sense. As much as it's good to have books like Salihin or some of the other ones that kind of summarize other collections, Risalas and all that sort of thing, it is important for the average person to take a look at the bigger sources. They are for us. Nowadays, we can look up, according to the subjects and such, what we want. What are things to be done, it can be folk-y sort of stuff, like what verses are good to say at this time or that time, and all that. It can be whatever subject you're looking for. Here's a series of sayings. So you can actually, without spending decades pouring through piles and piles of books, you can actually, even in a day, get an answer that might have again, taken a lifetime, or get a series of answers that could have taken a lifetime to the scholars of old. So these ideas that maybe, you shouldn't just, you don't rush to the judgments. That's important too, is you don't find half a verse that talks about something and then, not find out what the context is. You read through what's there and at least what you're reading through. And yeah, this idea of abrogation, the Quran doesn't abrogate itself. All that can be followed. Because people are like, well, which part do we follow? It's like, you can follow the whole thing,